To heck with it, I am sick of waiting. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new-ish album from the future sound of London. Rituals, E7.001. Man, it's been a long time since I've talked about the future sound of London, huh? Someday, probably quite far in the future, I'll have to do a proper series on this legendary duo, breaking down their lengthy catalog. They're among the best that the entire world of ambient music has to offer, with every single one of their albums feeling like it creates its own self-contained, living and breathing musical environment. They've put out so many amazing projects, from the 90s rave era nostalgia bomb that is their debut Accelerator, the incomparable classic double-disc alien ambient epic Lifeforms, the similarly expansive but darker and grittier tones of Dead Cities and its more subtle cousin ISDN, their work under the name The Amorphous Androgynous, which tended towards a lot of 60s psychedelic rock pastiches, most effectively delivered through the ever-underrated The Isness. And of course there's the entire Environment series, which started life in its first volume as a somewhat underwhelming recontextualization and half-compilation of ideas left over from Lifeforms, but quickly growing into much more impressive and unique territory with the original material on all subsequent volumes. From Environments 2 onwards, this series was how they titled all their mainline studio albums, often putting out projects that were just as good as their classic material. I've marked Environment 5 as my favorite album to have been released in 2014 overall, an absolutely stunning work that had a wholly original feel to it separate from any other work they'd released prior. Still my favorite volume in the series to this day. And then there was the double whammy in 2016 of Environment 6 and 6.5, which seemed to combine every single sound they'd explored over all their decades of work, and I collectively marked as my number 3 favorite album of that year. Now, I haven't done a proper video like this on a new project from these guys since the latter. They've continued to put out more work, but not any new proper albums. They've done calendar albums every year since 2017, where they drop one track every month, and they had those projects like EH 2019, Cascade 2020, and We Have Explosive 2021, which were long-form expansions on the ideas of all those classic tracks. I actually covered EH 2019 in the first Some Stuff I Missed volume, having been misled into thinking it was going to be a proper album, and getting disappointed that I was hearing nothing but recontextualizations of the same ideas over and over. Those are not main albums. Of course, eventually I saw the announcement of Rituals E7.001 back at the end of April, with the mention that it was going to be the first volume of a trilogy, which would collectively add up to Environment 7. All Bandcamp exclusive, by the way. As far as I know, you have to buy the albums off their page in order to listen to them in their full entirety, and they're not available for streaming. But given I am such a consistent fan and had full faith in their ability to deliver quality, I had no problem with buying it on site and even getting myself that CD copy. And also, if you're going to make a release exclusive to one site, may as well make it Bandcamp. Now, when the project first released, I decided, you know what, I think it'll be more fun if I wait this out and cover the entire trilogy in one video. Like, they may not be released exactly concurrently like 6 and 6.5 were, but if they're meant to be taken as part of one piece, I'll see how they come together. The last two were both better when taken as one package themselves. After waiting a while and hearing no mention of the sequels, I set up a poll on Twitter asking my viewers what they thought would be best. And while there didn't seem to be a strong preference one way or the other, they did appear to also think a video covering all three at once would be more fun. Though now it has been 3 full months since this album released, and there's been neither hide nor hair of this album's supposed sequels ever since. And I mean, maybe I'm getting impatient, but I just started to get antsy. Like, they've been announcing everything from repressings of old albums to a Lifeforms t-shirt run that sold out in my size within like 2 seconds. But on any follow-ups to Rituals, nothing. With how little talk there was of the sequels from the duo themselves, I was kinda half afraid I was gonna have to wait an entire year or longer for the later volumes. So eventually I just decided, screw it, I'll just cover them separately. I may be pretty damn late to this one, it's almost certainly not on the forefront of anyone's mind anymore, but I didn't want to just leave it by the wayside. Not to mention, this album is perfectly able to be taken as its own standalone work without any further context. And even if a video covering 3 FSOL albums at once would be more fun, I think there's more than enough here to merit getting a video all to itself. So yeah, Rituals is not necessarily a new mind-blowing classic, and I'm hoping its sequels are able to contrast its tone and build upon its ideas like 6.5 did for 6, but all on its own, it's definitely another solid addition to their Environment series that is just as worth listening to as all the other Environments albums are. Possibly the lightest, most tranquil and uplifting entrant in the series, like a brighter and more seamless companion to what they did on Environments 2, or even a few bits of ISGN many years ago, but still setting itself apart as its own thing apart from all of those. Well, on my first couple of listens, I only thought this album was just very good and didn't quite reach greatness for me. I'll also have to say that this thing has actually benefited quite nicely from the extra 3 months I've had just letting it sit around and grow on me. Every time I've put it on, it's gotten that little bit better. So yeah, going through individual tracks, the album starts out with its strongest foot forward in the absolutely excellent Hopiate. A piece that floats through tranquil psychedelic guitar loops, slowly builds up, and then pays off into this freaking amazing breakbeat section with thick bass lines and all the usual alien effects to further the album's sense of place. Just the kind of track that like instantly puts a smile on my face, makes it feel as if the sun's come out even if you're listening to it on an overcast day. From there, the album just keeps seamlessly evolving into lots of different ideas. You've got Triple Circles, which combines a slapping abstract IDM beat that has a more recent Outtaker-like quality to it, with all these expansive choir pads and menacing bleeping synth melodies. Really cool ethereal vibes created out of that one. Then after a quick interlude of abstract guitar plucking over bongos and Somewhere Outside, we get the much heavier Ritualized, which has this really thunderous, hip-hop-ish beat that undulates like a wobbling sheet of metal, but with lots of airy synth choirs and echoing dulcimers and violins to give the mix the more of the spacious quality that the rest of the album goes for. There's also lots of intense bass wubs that almost give the track like OG dubstep vibes. The whole thing kind of sounds like something like an artist like FSOL would do. Next, you got Time Cone, a mix of strange shaker sounds and these loops of wiry synth arpeggios, and a random switch up into these much brighter arpeggios right at the very end. It's one of the more simplistic cuts, not a huge standout, but still sounds quite nice as everything else. And you got Solar Signal, which has a more present skittering beat and some minimal ethereal pads that ebb and flow over it, eventually adding in a mysterious rounded bass line, and that leads into Sand It to Ocean, which gets even brighter and more energetic, containing all these shuffling percussion taps and colorful synth organ leads playing very happy-sounding major chord progressions. That one always stuck out to me as a highlight. But not as much of a highlight as following cut Far Seeker, which, with its various blips of 90s acid-like synth progressions, playing some mildly dark melodies and going over a bunch of really cool banging hip-hop beats, and that's not even to get into when those ethereal pads come in or those even more intense TB303 squelches later. It is so freaking good. That bleeds directly into the much more melancholy Slowly Slipped Away, which kind of feels more like an interlude, even though it's long enough to not be one. Lots of icy and dramatic synth pads with maybe a quick flute solo on top. Kind of gives me similar vibes to some of the most recent Klaus Schulze work I've been listening to recently. I will say it's a bit of a strange pick to have as a streamable preview cut on the Bandcamp page. I wouldn't say it's a major standout in the same way the other two cuts they chose as previews are, but still just as effective as anything else. Anyway, that bleeds into Visibility Accumulation, another colder and icier sort of cut that combines all these windy experimental pads with thunderous bass and sharp percussion blends. Feels like the soundtrack to Trying to Drive Through a Snowstorm, and everything's all murky and strange but still sounds really damn cool. I Am Error is a strange cut that's kind of split into two halves. Like, the first half is nothing but airy experimental pads that lack any kind of tune, but the second half is lots of layers of mechanical beats crashing on top of it. Admittedly not among the most distinctive of cuts here, but that leads into another interlude in Color Primary, which managed to be a solid favorite in spite of its scant length. Nothing but bright blipping synth melodies and flute solos. It's like a Boards of Canada interlude that eventually adds some more life sprinkled into it halfway through with some more bass and that kind of stuff. And that leads into Time Past the Sun, which, god damn, if Hopiate is the best cut here, this is the second best one. Always really stuck out to me among the coolest sounding cuts here overall. Lots of blends of ethereal echoing pads and rumbling bass going over a light tapping, almost hip-hop beat that really feels like you're watching like a gigantic clock ticking away. And the way some of these pads and flute solos and violins come together is just so freaking gorgeous that I barely have any words for. On the vinyl version of the album, this is where Rituals ends, which I will admit would be a pretty strong way to go out if you choose to listen to it that way. But of course, on digital and CD versions, we keep going, and there's still more highlights to come. For instance, this cut is immediately followed by a very pretty, almost solo piano piece in Ebb Flow. Really helps stick in some further emotional resonance and give the album a brief moment of minimalistic respite. All those high piano notes feel like you're watching snow falling. Avoiding Mirrors returns to the clanking IDM beats, lots of mechanical percussion being hard panned all over the place, and a couple of blips of dub techno bass to go along with it. Not much to it, but still pulls me in very nicely. Finally, we get to penultimate cut Clone A9, which has a much brighter and sunnier set of high-pitched bell-like synth melodies plinking over each other. Feels like you're watching flowers bloom in time-lapse. Though it also switches into some experimental IDM beats in some other parts and squirting bass lines that complement it surprisingly well. And then we finally close with Only in Memories, which is a bit of a strange way to go out, admittedly. It has some light beats and almost funk-influenced synth chords, with the entire mix just being like filtered and flanged around until fading out completely into the last 30 seconds of very quiet field recordings. I wouldn't say it's among the strongest or most memorable of their album closers. Honestly, Time Past the Sun would have made for a much stronger finish, but I also wouldn't want these last 4 cuts to be taken out either, so I'll keep it the way it is. So, that's everything on Rituals E7.001. It's really freaking good. And honestly, in this most recent listen I gave it for this video, I might just barely push it into great territory. I mean, this is not going to be, like, changing the game. Everything on here is stuff that FSOL have already proven themselves time and time again to be great at doing, but I mean, come on, you really can't go wrong with these guys. I do quite like how this album can have a much colder vibe to so many parts of it that feel like they're taking you into the dead of winter, like much of Environments 2 did. But there's also parts that feel much warmer, like spring and summer, and somehow all of it blends perfectly together in one really cohesive piece. One of the most seamless FSOL albums in quite a while. And that in itself was even an aspect of the album that kept it from clicking for me immediately, as in my first several listens, tracks would blend together a lot. But even in those early listens, I'd still get tons of standouts every time I put it on. And as I said, it's only gotten better since. I don't know if I'd recommend Rituals as like a great starting point to get into FSOL for the first time, when they already have much more obvious classic standouts in their earlier catalog. But if you already are a longtime FSOL fan and were still on the fence on whether or not this would be worth the purchase, I can in fact confirm that yes, it definitely is. Will it be a year-end list contender? Maybe, I'm not sure. And again, I really want to hear how the 2 announced sequels will be working off of this one, but even if it turns out that, like, I've jinxed it by making this video and, oh, they just drop the next E7 volume next week or something, I can still definitively say that Rituals has more than enough substance to stand on its own and be covered in the way that I finally decided to cover it. I think I enjoyed this just enough to let it get away with a solid 8 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list, a link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.